Namaste everyone, and thank you for coming to our first Vicharmanthan of 2017. Now, I just wanted to give you a bit of a background of where this topic started. I don't think I've ever considered animal welfare or the treatments of animal, despite the fact I've been vegetarian all my life. So at least not consciously anyway, thought about these things. So then we got talking to the VM team and I said, well, maybe this is something that we need to consider. And especially when all your life you've been brought up with concepts like ahimsa, so how do we put it into practice? Now, most Hindus would consider themselves as compassionate, and not just towards other human beings, but also to animals. Now, in Hindu Dharma, we clearly recognize the importance of animals. Although we might not know what the importance is, but it is depicted through our gods and goddesses. So we've got, Krishna with a cow, and we always see Mataji on a tiger or a lion. We see Shankar Bhagwan with, Nandi, the bull, or snakes around him. So the connection has been there for years, for thousands of years. And at Vicharmanthan, what we're looking to do is actually continue this age-old tradition of exploring and thinking Dharma in the 21st century. The UK was arguably the first country in the world to implement laws protecting animals. Now, I myself doubt that claim. As we know, many ancient traditions, including Ashoka himself, in the 2nd century BC, released a string of animal rights. Nevertheless, in 1822, an act to prevent the cruel and improper treatment of cattle was passed by the UK Parliament. There's a governing body who actually oversees the treatment of animals, and that's called DEFRA, short for Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Now, what they say is we recognize that animals are sentient beings, so conscious beings, not merely commodities. So the title of today's Vicharmanthan is, Does Our Understanding of Dharma Call for Stronger Animal Rights and a Change in Our Behavior? We will first be exploring Dharma in the context of animal rights. Then, to understand what it means by animal rights, what is it today and what it ought to be. Following that, we will have an open discussion as to should we change our behavior. So I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Acharya Vidya Bhaskarji. Vidya Bhaskarji is an ordained Acharya and a scholar of Sanskrit. From the age of 12 to 19, he studied Sanskrit at Kailash Ashram in Rishikesh before returning to Switzerland to pursue academic studies in comparative religion, where his thesis was on the idea of dharma in the Rig Veda. Acharyaji is a serious scholar. He spends his time translating classical and ancient texts, teaching all over the world, and lives at the ashram Omkara Ashram in Switzerland. He has joined us live all the way from Switzerland. And if you can hear us, Acharyaji, do a wave or, namaste, yeah, good old VM way. So thank you for joining us. And sat next to me, we have Dina Ahern. Now, Dina is an animal rights advocate and educator. She's a lawyer by profession, having recently left practice to dedicate more time to this cause. Dina campaigns for veganism by giving talks around the country and raising awareness about the realities of the dairy industry. So thank you, Dina, for joining us today. And so without further ado, we will ask Acharyaji to give his views on what dharma is in the context of animal rights.
So let me go directly into the subject by giving you quotations. And after that, I'll give you some interpretation of my own and also my own subjective view of how we should treat animals from the point of view of Hindu Dharma. So in the Kathopanishads, which is part of the Vedic canon, part of the Vedic texts, we have the following verse. Esha sarveshu bhuteshu gudhotma na prakashate drishyate tvagraya buddhya sukshmaya sukshma darshibhi. And the meaning is, the Atma is hidden in all beings, but as such is not evident. Yet it is perceived by those who see the subtle with their sharp, subtle intelligence. I'd like to repeat that it is present in all beings. Now let us have a look at what the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, has to say on the same subject. Vidya vinaya sampanne brahmane gavihastini shuni chaiva shvapakecha pandita samadarshina. Which means the wise see the same in a priest who has knowledge and modesty, or in a cow, or in an elephant, or in a dog, or in a lowly person. So what is that same? What is that Atma, which according to these verses in the scriptures is present in all beings? According to the Upanishads, the Atma is pure consciousness. It is an all-present consciousness, that which knows, that which cognizes, that which is the basis of all experience. And when we realize that not only we as human beings have consciousness, have awareness, have the ability to experience, when we realize that animals, all other beings, also have that ability, even though it may not be as expressed, as evolved, so to speak, when we realize that this is present with everyone, we begin to sense that there is no separation between our own consciousness and that of animals. So the Ishavasya Upanishad of the Vedas states the following: Yastu sarvani bhutanyatmanyevanupashyati sarvabhuteshu chatmanam tato navijugupsati. Which means that one who sees all beings within himself and himself in all beings no longer has any aversion towards anyone. Aversion in the sense of a hatred, a maltreatment, any sense of hurting another being. Then the important texts on Dharma, such as the Manava Dharma Shastras, say that, now I will only translate, I have the shloka, but we don't have so much time, states that he who kills harmless creatures for the sake of his own pleasure never attains happiness while living or after death. This is Manava Dharma Shastra 5:45. He who does not seek to inflict suffering of capture or death upon living beings, such a one is the well-wisher of all and obtains perfect happiness. This is Manava Dharma Shastra 5:46. He who does not injure anything or anyone obtains without effort what he aims at, what he undertakes, and whatever he fixes his heart upon. So these shlokas give us an incredible view of how we can see other creatures, other animals. They give us a view that consciousness is not only present in the human mind. They give us a view that any being that has consciousness, sentience, is worthy of our utmost respect. Now, some of you might be thinking, is this a rational position? Is this a reasonable position? Or is this a statement of faith? Is it a statement based on just a belief? And in this respect, I would like to quote the Yoga Vasishta, another one of the great texts of Dharma, which states, Api paurushamadeyam shastram ched yukti bodhakam anyam dvarshamapi tyajyam bhavyam nyayayika sevina. That only a text should be accepted which teaches based on rationality, yukti in Sanskrit. Someone who is completely devoted to logic, nyaya, should abandon every other type of text, even if the text comes from a rishi. Anyam tu arshamapi tyajyam. For those of you who understand Sanskrit, that even if the text is from a rishi, if it is not based on rationality, it should be rejected. Similarly, there is a quote, Yukti yuktam vachograhyam baladapi shukadapi ayuktamapi nagrahyam sakshadapi brihaspatehi. Which means that only a statement should be accepted which is justified by rationality. Yukti yuktam, justifiable by rationality, even if it is spoken by a child or by a parrot, because a parrot can learn by heart a statement that is rational. What is not rational should not be accepted, even if it was spoken by Brihaspati himself. Brihaspati is the guru of the gods. This is the power of rationality. And now we need to ask the question, is it rationally justifiable to mistreat animals? Is it rationally justifiable to kill animals or to have animals killed, or indirectly to approve the killing of animals for our sake, whether it is for the consumption of meat, or whether it is for testing animals for the sake of cosmetics, or even for medicine, or whether it is for using the skin of animals for our shoes. We need to ask the question, is it rationally justifiable? From the point of view of this scriptural presentation, it is not rationally justifiable, because animals have consciousness. Even a beetle reacts if we threaten its life. You can all experiment it, but please don't harm the beetle. But the beetle runs away if you try to endanger it, if you try to harm its life. That alone is proof that there is consciousness present in the beetle, even if it is at minimal consciousness. So the question is, what justifies harming another creature? There is no justifiable position. You see, it's very interesting. If you reflect upon it, there is no rationally justifiable position. None at all. There is only social conformity. That we conform with certain social practices, certain social habits of a specific society wherein which we happen to live. If we lived in a different society, we would automatically not harm any animals. And yet the position is not rationally justifiable. Harming animals cannot be justified in any way. This is also something that is acknowledged by great Western philosophers. We do not need the approval of Western philosophers for our Dharma, but I'm just pointing out this is a position that, for example, Peter Singer, who wrote the famous book Animal Liberation in the 1970s, which actually caused a lot of change in Western society. This is the position that Peter Singer also takes. He calls it speciesism. It's a kind of racism towards animals. In the past, for example, human beings thought that enslaving human beings was morally justifiable. Yet, once the mind became more rational, more universal, human beings realized it is not rationally justifiable to enslave other human beings or to treat other human beings differently because of the color of their skin. So people realized this is a form of racism. Now, in the same way, Peter Singer points out that to mistreat animals just because they are not humans is a different kind of racism. It is called speciesism. And I would like to close this observation with the fact that Richard Dawkins, the world's greatest atheist, or the most famous atheist, had a discussion with Peter Singer, you can all watch it on YouTube, in which he says the following. Richard Dawkins says that when people say, where do you draw the line between humans and animals? I say, why draw a line? There is a continuum of the capacity to feel pain. I suspect it is no worse for a human to have a knife slit his throat than for a pig. Then he continues, Richard Dawkins, I live in a society which is still massively speciesist. Intellectually, I recognize that. I go along with it the same way I go along with celebrating Christmas and singing Christmas carols and things like that. And yet, it is not justifiable. So, this is the position we need to take. We need to see that the Dharma scriptures give us a vast view of consciousness. Consciousness being the absolute reality. The scriptures give us a vast view of compassion. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one of the most ancient texts of humanity, belonging to the Vedas, gives us 3 commandments, 3 qualities that we need to nurture. Dhamma, self-restraint, that we don't just give in to our impulses, our anger, which is there in us, our tendency towards violence, which is there in us, but we do not need to give in to it. The second quality is dana, giving, generosity, not only towards human beings, but towards nature, towards animals, towards creatures. And the third quality is daya, compassion. That we learn to be compassionate, that we learn to see that our consciousness is not the only consciousness. My mind is not the only mind. I'm not the only creature who is suffering. All creatures are suffering. All beings are suffering. And we can view this rationally. It's not a blind faith. It is not a statement of belief that other creatures or beings can suffer when we mistreat them. It is just a question of observation, sharp observation, high intelligence, sharp buddhi, sukshma, agra buddhi, according to the Kathopanishad, that we use our sharp intelligence, that we reflect, that we do not give in to impulses, that we do not give in to irrational ideas, such as using animals as objects, as instruments, as tools for our own benefit only. This is the vast view presented by Dharma. And this is the only view that is rationally justifiable. So the challenge to all of you, many of you must be academics, the challenge to all of you is, please bring me a position, a view, according to which it is justifiable to mistreat animals in any way. That is the challenge. Come up with that view, try to come up with such a view, and let us discuss that with the highest rationality possible. That is the challenge of Dharma. And with this, I close and I pray to that consciousness which is present in all beings to bless each and all of us. That is a statement of belief, but it can also be a statement of experience. Hari Om Tat Sat.
So can you just tell me precisely what is the link between Dharma and animal rights?
Well, Dharma, the term Dharma has many meanings. Some of the meanings include social order. And a social order does not only relate to human beings, it also relates to animals. And I believe in your initial words, you mentioned Emperor Ashoka. Nowadays, he is known as a Buddhist emperor, but actually that doesn't really emerge from the edicts. So he always speaks about Dharma. And in those edicts, he describes that he has put in place the rules of Dharma to protect human beings and animals, that no animals are slaughtered in his kingdom, and that specific species of animals that are endangered should be protected. So when you ask the question, what is the direct link of Dharma and animal rights, the answer is that my position would be that Dharma is the very source of animal rights in human history. And therefore, whatever follows is a footnote to what was written in the Dharma Shastras, in the scriptures of Dharma. So this is the meaning of Dharma in the sense of the social order. But Dharma also means the truth. So the absolute truth. It is the requirement for our own minds to reflect rationally, universally, about what the truth is. Dharma really has the sense of satya. If you look at so I might be too long. These are the two answers, that on the one hand, the scriptures, and on the other hand, insight.
So that's interesting you say that. What about the historical application of dharma? Now, in history, did majority of Hindus eat meat? If so, how did dharma apply then? If they didn't, where did that consciousness come from?
So this is a historical question. Now we would need a great historian to answer the question whether Hindus in the past ate meat as they do today. It's a valid question. As you may know, some of the scriptures, specific sections of the scriptures, speak about specific rituals where animals are sacrificed, but not on a large scale, rather on very specific days. And the scriptures also state that eating meat apart from those sacrifices is not permitted. Now, my assumption is the following, that in the past, this was very, very, very closely adhered to, that these rules were closely observed, but that over time, gradually, society became less moral, didn't follow the scriptures so closely, and therefore eating meat became more common. Now we must also point out, and this is not against any other religions, we must point out that after the entry of the Islamic religion in India, with the rulers becoming Islamic from the 11th, 12th century onwards, a lot of morality changed in India. As you know, there are no such rules in Islam. So this influenced Hindu society to a great extent. But that does not mean it is rooted in Dharma to eat meat.
Okay, so would you say the animal sacrifice was justified? Because you were talking about being rational, and how would an animal sacrifice be justified then?
It's a very valid point, and precisely because of this point, a lot of voices within Dharma, within Hindu Dharma, spoke out against those sacrifices. We can find such voices in the Upanishads already. That means at the time of the Upanishads, we're talking about 1000 BCE approximately, there were already voices criticizing those kind of sacrifices. Then we have, at the time of the Buddha, we have the Buddha speaking out against such sacrifices. And then slowly, we see those sacrifices vanishing from the proper Vedic Dharma. So approximately, I would say by the 2nd or 3rd century, you wouldn't have had Vedic sacrifices of that kind. But locally, in specific temples, such sacrifices continued, and in certain areas in India, they do continue. And the answer to you is very simple. It is not rationally justifiable. Very simple answer.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And just want to ask you, Acharyaji, are you vegetarian?
Absolutely, and I'm proud to say that my great-grandmother was already a vegetarian because she had studied Hindu scriptures, and so my grandmother and my mother and all my family and myself. So absolutely, I hope that even in my past lives, I have never eaten meat.
So my last question is, are you a vegan?
It's a very valid question. I would say I'm almost a vegan, not fully. I don't drink coffee with milk. I don't take chai. And at least before that I did. And it is absolutely not justifiable to use animal products, such as dairy products, and at the same time say that we are treating animals well. Especially in our society today, it is not rationally justifiable. In the past, when cows were part of our farming and were part of our daily contact and were treated very well, I would say it was not a terrible mistake to drink milk and to use those products. But today, when cows are mistreated terribly for their milk, it is not justifiable. It is really not justifiable. So while I'm not fully a vegan, I would say that is a goal that everyone should indeed aspire towards.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your views. We're now going to move on to our next speaker. So what we'd like you to do is just stay online, and if you can listen to Dina, and then we'll come back to open Q&A with the audience. Thank you, Acharya-ji.
Thank you, Acharya-ji, as well for your take on Dharma and animal rights. And namaste to everybody that's decided to attend today. Well, as Falguni-ji has already introduced me, I'm an animal rights advocate, and I campaign for veganism all over the country. And the title of today was very much about animal rights and Dharma. And I think because that title has specifically mentioned the word animal rights, it is highly important for me to distinguish between what we mean as animal welfare and animal rights. And I'll explain why I want to distinguish between the two very shortly. So animal welfare really relates to our relationship with animals. So it's what your personal relationship is with your pet at home, or it could be what the farmer's relationship is with his herd of cattle in his farm. And it's really very much about the duty that one has towards their animals. And this phenomenon is quite a modern phenomenon. And I say modern, research seems to really show that we only began to domesticate animals, I'm talking about cattle, goats, sheep, we only really began to domesticate these animals, we only began to really drink their milk or eat their flesh about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. Now, if you think back to tracing modern day human fossils, which traces back to about 7 million years ago, if you actually put that on a 12-hour clock, we only really began domesticating animals about 1 minute ago, which is why I say animal welfare is a modern phenomenon. Now, adding to that, as the industries grew and as the farmer stopped going to his farm at 2:30 in the morning to milk the cows, modern technology took over. And so we began to replace people with machines to do the jobs like milking a cow. We began to have a lot more machinery. So 20th century technology very much severed that sort of ancient contract of the duty towards one person and his or her animals. Now, animal rights, on the other hand, so comparing it to animal welfare, animal rights is very much in the belief system that animal use and animal abuse are synonymous. The two go hand in hand. So one that believes in animal rights very much believes that animals are not ours to eat, they are not ours to wear, they are not ours to experiment on, and they are not ours to abuse or exploit in any other way. Now, the reason I wanted to distinguish between animal rights and animal welfare is because the UK legislation that governs animal welfare or the protection of animals is very much based on animal welfare, not animal rights. And it's really important to actually distinguish this, because the legislation that we have in this country, and as Falguni-ji mentioned in her introduction, the UK was apparently the first country to implement animal protection legislation back in 1922. It's really important to know that this is very much based on the premise of animal welfare. So what does animal welfare mean? Well, we have two main governing acts here. We have the Animal Welfare Act of 2005, and 7, and we have the Welfare of Farmed Animal Regulations of 2007 as well. And in general terms, these regulations, this act, stipulates that animals need to be treated humanely, that animals should be given adequate shelter, that they should be given food, water, and very importantly, the act states that animals should be free from any unnecessary pain and suffering. And I emphasize the word unnecessary, and I'll tell you why I've emphasized that word. So what do we mean by unnecessary? So what does the law say we're allowed to do? Or what are farmers, or what are the meat and dairy industry allowed to do that falls within this the necessary pain and suffering? We can't commit unnecessary pain and suffering, but we can commit necessary pain and suffering. So a lot of my work and my campaign relates to advocating for veganism within the Hindu community, because Hindus generally tend to be vegetarian. We revere the cow. We think the cow is sacred. Some may believe in Lord Krishna, cow herder. And therefore, I inquire into what actually happens within the dairy industries. And the dairy industry, under law, as standard practice, this is what is necessary pain and suffering. For a cow to be able to give us milk, she has to be pregnant. So like the human mother, she must have a child for her to produce milk. So how is that cow made pregnant? Well, she has a farmer that inserts his arm up into her rectum, up to about here, and I've seen it myself a number of times. He is feeling for the neck of her cervix, and I'm sorry for the detail, but it's important. He's feeling for the neck of her cervix, so he can then, once he feels for the neck of her cervix, with his other hand, he has a device called the artificial insemination gun, which has the semen of the bull in there, and he will insert the semen into her vagina. She is held together using a device called a rape rack, which holds her very tightly together so she doesn't kick. Now, this actual process is done so regularly that it's common practice that she will be injured, she will get disease, she will get infection. But they have to do it, because if they don't do it, we don't get our milk. So it's necessary pain and suffering. This is necessary. The law says that's okay. We can stick our arm into a cow's rectum. That's absolutely fine because it's necessary. Once she gives birth, because the calf will want to drink his or her mother's milk, after 1 to 2 days, the calf and the cow are separated, just so her milk can be then sold onto supermarkets so you and I can buy it. I've heard the screams of a mother cow who has lost her baby and knows that her baby is only 200 yards away, but she will never see her baby again. And she bore that baby, she held that baby in her womb for 9 months. I've heard the cries of a calf. In fact, to add a little bit more detail, these calves are so young, some of them, if they are male, are taken to slaughter, and they lick the hands of the slaughterman because they are seeking that love and attention and attachment that they never got from their mother. But the law says that pain and suffering is necessary, so that's allowed. Okay, that's allowed. Let's move on to the egg industry. When a female chick hatches, she is debeaked, which means her beak is cut off within 1 to 2 days. Now, she is not given any anesthesia, no painkillers, but that pain is necessary because once they debeak her, they can put her into the cages or they can put her into the free-range sheds, and she won't peck at other hens and therefore won't cause another hen any harm, won't peck at her feathers. So that's necessary, that's okay. We can manipulate and hybridize hens to produce about 300 eggs a year, when naturally they are only allowed to produce, or naturally they will only produce about 12 to 17 eggs per year in the spring, but we are allowed to manipulate them because that's necessary pain and suffering. They get osteoporosis, they get diseases, they get cancer because of the constant giving of eggs. But that's okay, that pain is necessary, it's absolutely fine. We have male chicks. Now, male chicks are actually seen as a byproduct of the egg industry because a male chick cannot lay eggs. So currently in the UK, we are, and if anybody here eats eggs, I'm sorry to give you this figure, but we are throwing into a grinder more than 50 million chicks, male chicks, a year. And the law says that pain and suffering is necessary because that's the most humane way to get rid of live male chicks as a byproduct of this industry. So imagine your grinder at home and we fill it up with live male chicks and we press the button. And the law is allowing us, the welfare laws are saying that's okay because that's the cheapest and the most humane way of getting rid of what we call a byproduct of the egg industry. I want to concentrate a little bit on something that we as vegetarians or those who drink milk are not told. When a calf is born, within the first 4 or 6 weeks of a calf's life, the calf will be debudded. Now, debudding is the process, standard practice process, where they get a hot iron rod and they will burn off the horns. Again, I've seen this happen, where this calf is held together with a tight rope and has a hot iron rod, boiling hot iron rod, placed onto the horns so they are burnt off. Now, I don't think we need to think whether a calf will feel pain. I think it's suffice to say that we can all agree that the calf will feel pain. Yet, they spend money doing research on this. So let's see what the research says. When a calf is being debudded, there will be tail shaking, head shaking, ear flicking, kicking, itching. Those are the physical behavioral changes. What are the physiological changes? There's going to be more plasma cortisol, more salivary cortisol, increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate. These are all indicative factors that this being is experiencing immense pain. But it's okay. It's necessary pain and suffering, and the law allows us to do it. So why not? Why do they do this? Let's just go into why they allow this bit in the law about necessary pain and suffering. Because ultimately, if they debud a calf, the calf will eat less, it will ruminate less space, because if it doesn't have horns, it doesn't require more space. And ultimately, it will gain more weight. So when it does go to slaughter, and when they weigh the dead weight of that cow, the fully grown cow or the calf, the farmer will get more money, because the amount of money the farmer gets depends on the dead weight of the animal that he's just sent to slaughter. So this necessary pain and suffering caveat within our legislation is very much based on what benefits humans, not what benefits the animals. I want to talk a little bit about the castration of piglets. How much time do I have? Am I okay? Right, so castration of piglets, something again we're not told about at all. Within the first week of a piglet's life, the pig will be castrated surgically without any anesthesia, causes immense pain. But that pain is necessary, it's okay, because ultimately the end meat product tastes better. So castration is really necessary, because the end product is of a higher, better quality. So ultimately it's profits, market forces that dictate what is necessary and what isn't. The law isn't designed to protect the animal, although it has been mentioned that the law talks about animals as sentient beings. Where is the sentience when we are causing an animal to suffer such immense pain, psychological, physical, physiological, for human benefit? and for a farmer's profit. The dairy industry in itself is worth more than £5 billion in the UK economy. How is it worth that much? How is it worth that much? I leave that question with you. So what are animal rights? Because I've talked about animal welfare, it's important to now talk about why, animal rights need to be bear in mind for us if we're talking about Dharma and animal rights. Well, animal rights very much recognize that animals have similar levels of biological complexity. They're conscious, they're aware that they exist. I don't know if any of you guys own any pets, have any pets, but if you've ever stood on a dog's tail or a paw and they scream, that tells enough that an animal is capable of feeling pain. If you ever try to remove a calf from a cow or where the bull is present, that cow is most likely going to try and kill you, which shows that they are capable of forming attachments. Very similar to how we form attachments with our children. So all these humane labels that we are given, organic milk, free-range eggs, these are simply just labels to make the consumer feel less guilty about what they buy. If we really want to walk the Dharma and not just talk our Dharma, we really need to wake up and open our eyes to what lies we are fed by the industries over and over again. And I myself was fed these lies. For much of my life as a vegetarian, I believed that the cow happily, naturally gave us milk. I couldn't be further from the truth. And when I realized exactly what a cow went through, on the one hand, as a lawyer, I thought, well, the laws protect and they give them all this protection and there's legislation. And then when you see what real emphasis is placed on the legislation and how it's really about driven profits rather than the protection of these sentient beings, I realized that I had to take things into my own hands and actually decide myself consciously what I put into my mouth, what clothes I decide to wear, whose skin I decide to wear, whose flesh I decide to eat. And if we are to really implement Dharma to its truest form that Acharya-ji has spoken about, then veganism seems to be the only way. And as mentioned, of course, veganism is very much a journey. So for those that are considering it, food is the most obvious choice. The clothes we wear, the shoes we wear, the wallets we have, the cars we drive, those things can happen over time as they did for me. But make food the most conscious dharmic choice. I think that's takes me to place.
Thank you, Dina. That was really interesting. Wouldn't you agree? Sorry, my mic's going off a bit. So I just want to ask you a few questions now off the back of what you've said. Obviously, you're campaigning for animal rights. Now, from everything that we've heard so far, wouldn't it be more important to, campaign against animal welfare rather than animal rights?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. And I think there are two sort of avenues to this. There are very much a large number of animal rights advocates that are campaigning for stronger animal welfare laws, which there need to be stronger animal welfare laws. So there's a sort of top-down approach, but there's very much a grassroots approach as well. We can wait. We can sit here today and I can talk about the laws and we can wait until the laws are improved. We can wait until those that make the laws recognize that animals need more protection, that welfare laws need strengthening, and we can go about our day through our routine, taking that milk from the fridge, making our Indian chai or putting it in our cereal. Or we can campaign for that, but on a grassroots level, we make the conscious choice to make a difference through what we put into our mouth and what we decide to consume. So I think, yes, of course we need stronger welfare laws, but if we're talking about Hinduism and Dharma, then the people who are making the laws do not recognize dharmic principles in legislation. And it's important that the people that are making the laws within this country are not going to revere the cow like you and I. They're not going to have a Krishna photo in their home, and they're not going to light a divo and give thanks to the sustenance that these beings give to us. They're always going to be commodities regardless of how much you strengthen the laws. They will ultimately always be based on animals being a commodity.
Okay. So my next question is, say for example, animal rights were given to all the animals, where is the boundary? So for example, I was getting attacked by a tiger. So who would someone support? You know, whose life would be more important? The tiger's or mine? Because obviously the rights are the same for both of us. So where is the boundary in such scenarios?
Well, I mean, firstly, and as a vegan, by the way, I get quite a lot of hypothetical questions about if you're on a desert island and you got attacked by an animal, or as Falguni has said about the attack of a tiger. Firstly, it's very unlikely to happen to any of us in this room right now, so let's just sit safely knowing that. But if in case it did happen, then of course it comes to, you know, the natural instinct of yourself as a human being to protect yourself, to the natural instinct of a tiger to hunt and want to kill. When we're talking about animal welfare laws, we're very much talking about the animals we have domesticated and we are killing in their billions for the fickle reason of food and milk. But when it comes to a tiger in the wild, doing what it naturally does, I don't think I would be sitting here watching the tiger want to kill you and not expect you to do something about it. I myself would want to protect myself too, but it's an unlikely scenario.
Yeah, maybe in this country for sure, but if I was out in Africa somewhere, yeah, the possibilities are there. So are you a Hindu, Dina, firstly?
I'm a Hindu by default,
Okay.
which means I was born into a Hindu family.
But would you consider yourself still as a Hindu or not really?
That's a good question. I actually consider myself to be human. I don't consider myself to be anything other than human, because by being Hindu, what does that mean? I mean, we've already established that that's changed over time. Once we used to sacrifice animals for particular reasons. Now we don't permit that. So one was Hindu then and one is not Hindu now. So I don't really subscribe to such labels.
Okay. So what I would like to ask is, does Hindu Dharma call for animal rights? And can you illustrate what those rights would look like in a world with Hindu values?
Yeah, absolutely. And from, of course, what I know about my own sanskars that have been instilled in me by my parents and my own dharmic education and my knowledge of Hinduism, for me, animal rights and Hinduism are synonymous. I mean, in my ideal world, I would hope that anybody who in this room sees themselves as a Hindu, and because Hinduism is the topic today, would walk away knowing that actually to really fully practice Hinduism and Dharma in this day and age, in a country that we live in right now, with the industries that are there, veganism is the only way, the kindest way, the most compassionate way, the only way to really subscribe ahimsa to your life. Because anything less than that is not ahimsa. It really isn't.
So you've talked a lot about animal rights in the context of the diet, but what about other things? Because surely it's just not about diet. So what else is there?
There's the clothes that we wear. Of course, many who would not eat the flesh of a cow will perhaps have leather boots, or a leather belt, or a leather wallet, or a leather sofa. So I think veganism or animal rights extends to not wearing what isn't ours to wear, from silk saris to woolen coats, to having down in our pillows. It, of course, extends to the products we buy and those products that are experimented on animals, from household goods to cosmetics to perfumes. It extends to, and for me, part of my journey is very much now looking at how often I fly, how often I decide to go on holiday, and the impact that the pollution of one airplane has on wildlife and the ecosystem. So veganism doesn't just stop with, of course, the food that we eat. It's very much an extension to how you tread as lightly as possible and as practicable on this earth, so we create as little impact to all the other inhabitants of this earth.
So a lot of people think the activism behind animal rights can be considered quite extreme. So what's your view on that? You know, what do you think?
I agree, actually. I'm quite regularly stigmatized when I meet people for the first time and I say that I'm an animal rights advocate. I deliberately do not use the word activist because the word activist has so many connotations. And I think the stigma comes very much from the 60s and the 70s, when a lot of animal rights activists used to take the direct action approach, which literally meant that a lot of them were not afraid to break into slaughterhouses. They were not afraid to climb on trucks, to stop trucks from taking animals across the border to other countries for slaughter. And I think in recent years, there's a newer sort of revolution happening with a newer generation of activists who are professionals, who are well-versed, who are articulate, who are not anarchists, who can very much be within society, work within society, operate within society, vote, pay bills, pay council tax, and yet still try to educate and raise awareness within society.
Thank you so much, Dina. A big round of applause for Dina, thank you. Now that we have a better understanding of Dharma and animal rights, I'd like to open it out to the audience. So I know there could potentially be lots of questions and we may not have enough time to get round to all of you. But before we go to the audience, I just want to make you aware of some Vicharmanthan house rules. Those who have been before know it, those who are new, you'll be happy to know that everyone only has 60 seconds, okay, to kind of give their question or the explanation. So you've got 60 seconds. Please keep your questions brief and precise. Now, obviously, if I find that, you know, you're kind of going on a bit, I might just have to step in a bit. So let's keep it nice and brief, so at least we can get round to many questions as possible. So yeah, over to you guys, and I think Shruti's going to come round with the mic.
This is a question for Dina. Did you like cheese and paneer when you were a vegetarian? And if so, how did you overcome this on your journey towards veganism?
Really good question, actually. I used to love cheese. And I loved paneer, especially the way my mum made paneer. So it was when I became vegan 7 years ago, cheese was one of the hardest ones for me to give up. And I realized over time that cheese actually has addictive qualities. So when I am campaigning for veganism and people ask me this question or say to me, I really want to become vegan, but I can't give up cheese, or I love my paneer, what do I do? I say, actually, you know, you have legitimate reasons, because it is as addictive as an opiate. The quality that it has is akin to an opiate. So it's very much about, actually, for me, in my mind, my personal journey with it was because I was exposed every day, and I still am every day, to the atrocities committed to dairy cows. I couldn't swallow it. I didn't want to put it in my mouth, because I realized that, yes, it was something that I really enjoyed the taste of, but in every taste of paneer, in every taste of cheese, I am eating the tears and the suffering of a mother cow. And that would get stuck here. And I've never wanted to have it, because I am ethically so far attached to what happens to these beings that how can I eat a byproduct of their pain and suffering? No, actually, it's when I became vegan 7 years ago, the amount of vegan cheese available there wasn't much. And so for a number of years, I didn't actually eat any vegan cheese. But in the last 1 or 2 years, the amount of vegan fairs that have come about in this country, the amount of people that are now experimenting to make vegan cheeses from cashews to soya milk to coconut oil, there's an abundance of vegan cheeses, and there's so many different ones to try. So I have now found my favorite vegan cheese, which I, on the odd occasion, have. And also more and more restaurants now, when you go to ask for a pizza, for example, they have vegan cheeses. That was unheard of a few years ago.
Yep, and I totally agree with your question, because it's a very valid one. I myself missed cheese the most. Okay, Sanjay, your question? Yes, please.
Hi, Dina. My question is to you. I just want to firstly thank you and congratulate you on the work that you're doing, actually. But I'm curious to know, most of us ignore this type of stuff. How did your journey begin?
I began quite a spiritual journey about 10, 12 years ago, where I was meditating a lot. And part of the meditation, and some of my teachers would say to me that in order to open up your third eye, you know, one should be vegan. And I was very much on a deeply embedded spiritual journey, really wanting to experience different realms of consciousness. But yet I couldn't give up my cheese, okay? So it wasn't enough for me. And then we ended up getting a dog. And we got our dog at a very vulnerable time in our lives. We had somebody very close to us pass away. And for many, many years, my parents had said, you're never having a dog, you're never having a dog, you're never having a dog. And they were at their most vulnerable, and my brother and I exploited that vulnerability and went and bought a puppy. And it was bringing that puppy home and seeing that puppy look up at me that I realized that there is no difference between the unconditional love that I have for this puppy to what every other animal deserves to have. And at that point onwards, I actually saw a video of what happens to a dairy cow, and the two sort of happened around the same time. And that was like a light switch for me, very much like a light switch. I didn't want to participate at all in their pain and suffering, and then go home and give my fur baby the amount of love that I could give it, and yet not extend that to all the other animals, even though they weren't pets in my home. And it's what Vidyaji was talking about in terms of speciesism. I was a speciesist, very much so, until I felt the love of another being and realized that same love that I felt had to extend to every other being.
I just wanted to add about the question of how to overcome taste and such issues. You see, the scriptures for this very purpose tell us that in order to overcome habits, we have to practice yoga. And yoga isn't just physical exercise. It is also mental discipline. It is also going into the depth of our own minds through, for example, meditation. And meditation is not a belief system. Modern research at top universities such as Stanford and others, Stanford has a Center for Compassion Studies, shows that when you meditate, when you practice regular meditation, you become more compassionate automatically. Your brain structure becomes more fluid in the sense of you become more adaptable, you overcome habits. So those of you who have a motivation to become better human beings, to treat others better, should also train that through meditation and yoga, and in a rational way, not as a belief system. Thank you.
Both the speakers touched on medical research. I've got quite a specific question. Thanks to the work of people like Dinaji, in this country we have probably the most restrictive standards. We've still got a long way to go, and I'm sure that work will continue. But what can we do as Hindus to approach the issue that we have in this country, where researchers, when they are stopped by the Home Office from doing work that is deemed by fairly low standards as unnecessary pain, and they simply just go to another country like the UK or the rest of Europe. What can we do? What does our Dharma tell us our duty to do?
Are you asking what ought the Hindu community do when it comes to things like medical research and use of animals in that particular instance? Okay, so Vidya Bhaskar-ji, the question is, and medical research is just an example where legislation as it is may well be of a high standard, but it's essentially moving the problem rather than really eradicating it. And the example the question I just gave was about medical research, where standards are relatively very high in this country, at least in the UK, but effectively the problem is just passed on. So the question was, how should the Hindu community respond to that? If you want to add anything to that.
Well, primarily there has to be a voice. The voice needs to be heard. It doesn't make sense for Hindus just to sit at home meditating upon ahimsa. It has to be made known to society, because sometimes human beings, even if they're very intelligent, need to be told, need to be informed about different perspectives. And this is precisely what happened in the example I gave about Peter Singer, the author of Animal Liberation. He brought in a perspective that nobody in Western society heard about. Similarly, Hindus now in the UK, you have a bigger community. In India, we have a great community. We need to make ourselves heard by bringing out these perspectives in the form of rational convictions, not emotional convictions. Of course, emotional stories are very important to touch the other human being, but our convictions need to be conveyed rationally. Then they can actually become universally valid points of view. Voice, there needs to be character building. So young people like all of you, I can't see you, but I assume you are young. Young people like all of you have to ask themselves, is my character really fully compassionate? Because you can change your character. Similarly, you can point out to society at large, is your character compassionate? This is something that resonates with people. That is why there's a lot of modern research going on. So I don't have so much time, but research is another aspect. If Hindus can push a research agenda, like Buddhists have done at Stanford, at major universities, if Hindus can join hands with Buddhists on the research agenda, a lot of policy can be changed. If you can create a think tank, Vichar Manthan as a think tank, to influence policy, that is how you can influence legislation as well in the long run.
Thank you, Vidya Bhaskar-ji.
Thank you to both of the speakers. I'm a vegan, by the way, and I'm a Hindu vegan. I'm proud of it. One of the things I find really interesting about this is the rational and the emotional kind of connections that we're making. But I find it, and it's not a question, and I'm a regulator, so I'm going to check my time. One of my big questions is, and it's not necessarily a question to the speakers, but I'm sure it's one that they ponder, is when I'm invited to go to Hindu temples, Hindu events, and they will speak about Siya Rama me Saba Jagajani, Karuhu Pranama, Jori Jugapani. I see Siya Ram in everything around me. And at the same katha, the same event, ghee, milk, and all of these things are shared at Mass. We'll go to Hindu temples and there'll be milk poured over in ceremonies. And there's such a huge contradiction there, which I find fascinating. And I think, really, are we conscious? And I celebrate the two speakers here today, and I think we need to give them as much support as possible to do some of the activist work, to do some of the work around policy change. And the more people who engage with that, that's where we're going to start to see a big change. I tried it with a few Hindu leaders and scholars in India, and I got a mixed response. I got some who were very interested and others who were like, why are we doing things like this? And I found also that, so at one position they'll be sitting on seats telling us to have compassion, and in the next breath, we'll be having siro with ghee in it.
Okay.
So it's quite a big question for us all, I think we need to leave with today.
So did you want to ask that question to the speakers as well? Or?
Yes, why not?
Yeah, yep. Dina, do you want to start with that one and then?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, you know, to echo what has just been said, I myself, as part of my campaign, I've presented to a number of mandirs here in Leicester, had direct dialogue with a number of the presidents, committee members, and whilst they all show dismay and they are shocked to see some of the footage that I show them and some of the facts that I present to them, when I ask the question, and the ultimate and most important question is, what are you going to be doing with this information that I've presented to you? They've still not done anything. And that, through my sort of past years campaign amongst the Hindu temples in Leicester, I have realized that the change has to come with you and I. And that when we go to these temples to practice Hinduism and to practice our faith, and when we decide to pour maybe a small cup of soya milk over the shivling on a Monday rather than the milk of a cow that belongs to the calf, we are showing change. Because ultimately, didn't Gandhi say that be the change you wish to see? And that actually knowing something and not doing something about it is worse than not knowing at all. And we might as well hold hands with the perpetrators of the violence if we know this knowledge and are choosing not to do anything. So yes, on the one hand, it's an immense contradiction. You know, the priests of these mandirs will in abundance talk about our values and ahimsa, but once they're presented with this, with the atrocities of these industries, they will very quickly push it away and say, why don't you take that to our MP? Why do you not take that to our councillor? Oh, we will, and we are, but what are you willing to do? And if as human beings we are not willing to make the change ourselves first, how can we expect an industry or an organization to make that change? So the change comes with you and I, and then it goes outwards.
And Vidya Bhaskarji, would you like to add?
So the question was, and I'm paraphrasing, effectively that there seems to be a contradiction within the temples in Hindu Dharma period, which wherever you go, where this notion of compassion is always preached, but then with the next breath, you know, people are pouring milk or using ghee and animal products to effectively then show a sense of worship. So really the question was something about your views on that apparent contradiction.
Right? So, well, we have to remember that in the past, now of course you can say, why talk about the past? But it's very important. In the past, every temple had its own goshala, and the cows were treated as gomata and were worshipped and were honored and revered. So in that situation, this criticism did not apply. I hope you agree with that. Yet you're absolutely right that today, when the dairy industry has become a source of suffering to cows, it is a total contradiction that temples pour thousands and thousands of liters of ghee and milk. It's a total contradiction. Absolutely agreed. And this is something, for example, that one could bring to the attention of the government. At the moment, we have a very pro-Hindu government, and this is something that from top down could be communicated in a gentle way, in a balanced way. I never agree with fundamentalism in the sense of that a black and white approach. It could be something that is conveyed to the temples in the spirit of Gomata respecting Gomata. And then I'm sure that this could be reduced. However, I'm an idealist, and sometimes things just have to be conveyed in any possible way that it is conveyable. But there is no question that it is not justifiable. Absolutely agreed.
I would like to ask you, are there any practicing Christians in the audience today? Anyone? Yes, Semi? Okay, so what are your thoughts from a Christian perspective? Yeah, we'll get a mic to you.
Yeah, Christianity is okay. I was brought up in a Christian community. But I think that Dharma and the whole Hindu faith really caught me in early adolescence. And it's more holistic, more joined up, more enlightened. Christianity is fairly flat. It's just do what we say, don't question it, and don't really think about it. Don't consider how you interact with your world. And that's the wonder of the Hindu faith. It's so much about awareness. It just and hearing you sharing your ideas. It's a different experience than going to a Christian church. It's just basically dogma. You're just told, do not question it, just do what you're told. And I've been involved in the dairy industry. I have an interest in it, and it's getting so much worse right now. The number of farms.
Okay, so basically the reason I was asking this particular question, now this might be across the kind of Judo-Christian Islamic faith, is that especially I'm going to refer to the Bible in this context, that it says in the Genesis that we, so humans, shall have dominion over animals. So basically it's trying to say that many Christians take that to mean they can eat meat and use animals however we want. Therefore they can eat meat. So it seems like Christians would support animal welfare rather than animal rights. Is that, what would you say?
I completely agree with that. This is it's a command and control structure. And the command and control structure is linked through the judiciary, the courts, the landowners, and the big farmers. They're all part of a cartel. And effectively, we're all living a big lie. 4,000 farms have shut in the last 5 years, but the head count of cattle hasn't reduced. There's another 2,500 farms to shut in the next 5 years. We'll end up in England and Wales with about 2,000 farms with exactly the same number of cattle. And it's reckoned that a farm to be viable, we need to have 2,000 to 3,000 cattle on it. It's an industrial monster. Okay. It isn't how we, within your faith and how you rear the cow, it is nothing like that on this earth. It's an absolute living nightmare.
Sure, thank you for your thoughts. Is there any more questions in the audience? Yeah, we've got, if the gentleman at the back there, well, no, just where you are in the orange top.
For either speaker, really. But from vegetarianism to veganism, that subtle change and an altruistic thinking on the one hand is excellent. However, fundamentally at the grassroots, we have outside the Hindu tenet other religious diktats which clearly define and give and condone how animals should be killed, both in terms of Sharia law and Judaism law, so don't bring Christianity into it, which define halal meat, obviously, and kosher meat, which is consumed by nearly 70% of the people on this planet. So are we within our own framework of this journey that you talked about from vegetarianism to veganism, spitting in the wind against such a huge sea difference on the other side of the equation, which actually condones and defines how animals should be killed for human consumption? Either speaker to comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll ask Vidya Bhaskarji to answer that one first.
So Vidya Bhaskarji, the question, and both are related because you wanted to come in on the previous question regarding the Christian perspective. In fact, the questioner from the audience has just said that what are your thoughts regarding the fact that, within Judaism you have kosher meat and there are particular prescriptions about an animal may be slaughtered, and same way within the Islamic tradition where there is halal meat. And it seems as if the general thrust of humanity, specifically with the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic faith, which is by far the majority in that sense, it seems like this whole discussion is just going against the wind. And I think it's effectively, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what is very interesting actually is that Genesis has two narratives. The first narrative of creation before the flood, now I'm talking to those of you who know Christian theology, the first narrative actually describes a vegetarian world. You can all check it yourself. Open Genesis, before the flood, vegetarian world. You may live of the fruits. Right? That is the statement. I don't have the Bible in front of me, but I know this is the case. And then after the flood, then the text of the Bible allows the eating of specific animals. But in the prophet Isaiah's book, the book of Isaiah, where the vision is described of where creation is moving towards, it is again a status where the wolf and the sheep lie side by side peacefully, where the wolf does not eat the sheep, where it's again a vegetarian goal, so to speak. You can check it for yourself. So the idea is basically that the kingdom of God, meaning that towards which creation is moving, will again be a vegetarian, purely vegan even, kingdom of God, as it was in the beginning before the flood. So in paradise, in the Garden of Eden. So this is not my interpretation of the Torah, the Jewish scripture, and it's also part of the Christian scripture. This is actually officially there. And it will be interesting for you to know that the first Christian monks, Saint Anthony, who was one of the first Christian monks and started monasticism in Christianity, imposed upon all Christian monks vegetarianism. You can check it for yourself. So these are very valuable resources. These are points that we can point out from the perspective of Hindu Dharma. It is not as if this is absent in the Christian tradition. As for the Sufis also, in some cases, the Pirs and the great Sufi saints, also acknowledged that all animals, all creatures are created by the Lord and therefore cannot be just used for the pleasure of the human being. So there too, there are resources that we can work with. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Acharya-ji, for clarifying that. That's something I wasn't aware of at all. So Dina, what's your perspective on this?
I think it's a valid question, particularly with almost 70%, maybe more now, of all the meat in the UK currently is all halal, whether you're against halal or not. And one of the sort of common debates and conversations I have with Islamic scholars and those who follow Islam is the actual killing of animals without stunning. Not to mention 1 in 3 animals that are stunned in UK abattoirs are missed anyway, and they don't stun again because it costs too much money. But let's just talk about the halal process. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually in the Quran and through his teachings in the Hadith, it's very common knowledge that he was actually a vegetarian for most of his life. In fact, he only ate meat once a week. And that was because of his time in the desert. The harsh conditions meant that for his body to sustain the harsh conditions, he had to eat goats predominantly, but most of the time he was actually vegetarian. And the actually killing of animals to the extent that they are killed now do not follow at all the Islamic way whatsoever. And that's definitely a campaign that is going on, it's current. It certainly doesn't negate the vegetarian to vegan argument, but I think the two are very much, they go hand in hand, and one shouldn't, detract from the other.
I think I want to ask a question next, just one final one. So obviously talked lots about diet, but what about things like going to the zoo? So obviously in this country we don't see any wildlife, so it's such a great way to educate kids, educate ourselves about these types of animals. What are your thoughts of actually, you know, the treatment of animals within the zoos, and as an animal rights advocate, would you encourage that or no?
My short and simple answer to zoos is absolutely not. I mean, I ask all of you just for a moment, if you were put in a cage or behind a glass wall and you had a whole host of other people staring at you for hours upon the day, how would you like that? Second to that, only 20% of zoo income goes to actual animal conservation. So actually, when zoos say that they are promoting animal conservation, that's not happening at all, because if that was the case, why would they have an abundance of surplus killing? And zoos are known in this country and within the Western world and anywhere else, I'm just talking about the Western world, that when they have surplus animals, they cull these animals purely to keep it within the confines of what they classify as a zoo. So if you really want to teach a child about wildlife or teach a child about animals, there are so many sanctuaries in this country, sanctuaries which are run often by volunteers where they have rescued animals that were going to slaughter. Why not take your child to a sanctuary and promote compassion through showing that this cow would not be here today had it not been for this sanctuary who has rescued this animal? Why not, you know, show your children through wildlife programs on television where they actually take you right to the core of where these animals are rather than to the confines of what we call a zoo? So absolutely not. As an animal rights advocate, I'm totally against the current structure of zoos.
Okay, thank you for your thoughts there. I think Sachi wants to ask a
So I'm going to ask a quick question to both Acharya-ji and to Dina. Just to be a devil's advocate in all this, we talk about ahimsa as in non-harming, and one thing appears to me that, you know, for example, soya bean production, some of you may know, is causing huge deforestation all over the world. Soil irrigation, there's a lot of irresponsible agriculture there as well. So it seems as if, being devil's advocate here, that actually, you know, I think the meat industry employs something like 400,000 people, and God knows how many hundreds of millions across the world. Effectively, is there an argument to be said about the fact that taking harm away from one area, you're pushing the harm somewhere else, whether that's agriculture, whether that's deforestation, the environment, or something else, and human economic degradation? It's just a question, but I think it's worth exploring. You decide who goes first. Okay, so Acharya-ji, you're just here, so I'm going to ask you first. 2 minutes, please, if brief as you can, and then Dina-ji can make her remarks.
Right. So you see, this is the same kind of thinking, like before computers were invented, or before computers became widely known. People were worried that computers would take away the jobs of ordinary people. But actually what happened, computers replaced and created many more jobs. Similarly, robots and all the discussion going on that they will take away jobs, well, what will happen is there will be new jobs. So I don't think the argument that the meat industry, if it is reduced, if people consume less meat, that the meat industry will then cause rampant poverty in the world, I don't think that argument works. People can just find different jobs, have new creative ideas. There's so many other ways to become busy and to offer some service to other people, meaning in society. So that argument doesn't work. I don't think so. As regards soy plantation, you're absolutely right. There are many other ways that we are harming nature indirectly. Deforestation and all those issues. All this shows precisely what the scriptures have been saying all along, that our actions have consequences, that our actions are not just momentary deeds, momentary actions that have an immediate result, like dropping a ball. Our actions have long-term consequences. That is precisely what our Dharma scriptures have been saying all along. And by becoming more and more aware of this, we need to find the middle way. We need to find balanced policies that our planet, our societies can move into the future in a very, very sustainable way. And I'd like to close with a small story. I won't take long. You all know the story about Yudhishthira. At the end of the Mahabharata, after all the conflict, he wants to ascend to heaven, to Svarga, in his physical body. And he's walking in the Himalayas, and he has a dog with him. So he reaches the portal of heaven, of Svarga, and Indra stands there and tells him he can't enter with the dog. And Yudhishthira says, I'm not going to enter without my dog, because this is an animal. This animal will get harmed if I am not here to protect it. This animal has been loyal to me. I will never, never give up someone who cannot protect himself or itself. And he says, I'm not going to enter heaven. This is the attitude we need. This is the kind of emotional awareness also that we need to convey, in addition to rational justification as the most powerful argument. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a valid point. And when I'm campaigning for veganism, when I'm standing outside slaughterhouses, when I'm talking to farmers who have just dropped off a whole bunch of cows to be taken for slaughter, and he's got a dog next to him and he feels nothing, I don't wish him, to lose his job. I don't wish ill will on him or his family. But what I do know is that they always have choice. And I've met through my work ex-farmers, I've met ex-slaughtermen, I've met ex-butchers, I've met ex-milkmen. All these people used to once be part of those industries, have now removed themselves from those industries and have been able to find other jobs utilizing the skills perhaps that they've learned through those pre-existing jobs. To add to that, at the end of the day, the industries very much work on supply and demand. And only recently I read that there are a number of farms, big farms, that have recently decided to sell plant-based milks because people are not wanting their dairy milk. So they will operate on simple economic supply and demand. Now, Sachin, you mentioned the impact on the environment, and that's a very valid point. I will add to that, of course, by having soya, the plants and the grains that us vegans eat, of course that has an impact on the insects. Of course it has an impact on deforestation, but it's relative. And you compare that to the amount of deforestation that happens to grow the same soy and grain in those countries that is then taken to the Western world to feed to the animals that are then fed to humans, and you can't compare it. Ultimately, we're human and we need to live to eat. We need to survive. Therefore, we have a choice of what impact we have. And by being vegan, I'm not at all saying that one is then perfect. Not at all. But you're doing everything you can to tread as carefully as possible to lessen the impact that you have. And there's always a choice. The Vegan Society, by the way, only last week announced that they are supporting a local large dairy farm in the UK to go to more plant-based foods. So there is support there, it's available if they want to do it. And they will do whatever will give them money. And that's dictated by us as the consumer.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dina. So thank you for your questions and thoughts, but sadly we are out of time. So just to summarize, Vidya Bhaskarji eloquently described what Dharma is in the context of animal rights from a historical perspective, a spiritual perspective, and his own personal perspective, for which I'm very grateful. And one of the key points I think we can take away from what Vidya Bhaskarji said is we should be rational. Think, is it justified to eat meat or to wear what you're wearing or to buy what you're buying, whether it's cosmetics or whatever it may be, the car seats, and where to visit as well. So, you know, we have that choice. Let us think through them choices and think wisely. And then Dina gave us a very passionate perspective about the difference between, and she educated as well, I think, about animal welfare, the difference between animal welfare and animal rights. And she described what might animal rights look like in the future. So, I mean, it's definitely eye-opening to find out the amount of pain and suffering that's allowed as part of the UK law. And should we be doing anything to change that? And I think that's a really critical question to ask ourselves. So who knows if one day animals have rights? Dina could be our next Prime Minister. Just don't know. Okay, and so we've had some very interesting questions, very constructive discussion, and I just hope our speakers have given us enough thought to carry on this month and amongst our friends and family. So finally, a show of hands. Who thinks they have now a better understanding of animal rights and animal welfare in the UK? Brilliant. Vidya Bhaskarji, well, actually, I'll come to your point in a minute. So Dina, I'm sure she's really happy that she's educated you guys well. And finally, who feels that they have a better understanding or better idea of Dharma in the context of animal rights as well? Brilliant. So that's almost all the audience there, Vidya Bhaskarji. So thank you for that. And that's it from me. So I just want to pass you over to Sachin, who's going to conclude today's event. Thank you. Actually, it's not Sachin, it's Ravi, so sorry. Carry on.
Hi, so I'm going to invite Sachin on.
Oh.
Yeah, no, so just before I conclude, I'd like to invite Sachin on to talk about our Well Wishes Fund.
I completely forgot about that, actually. So, very, very quickly, I hope you found this interesting. As you can see, Vichar Manthan is a space where we are trying to explore ideas as earnestly as we can, and we want to always invite expert witnesses to come and discuss, argue, debate, etc. Those of you who've been coming to many Vichar Manthans already know what we do, but so you know, we are a voluntary-based organization. We're not funded by anybody bar well-wishers, and our well-wishers contribute anywhere between £1 a month to £10 a month, and etc. If any of you would like to support our work and our chapter, we would really welcome a standing order monthly contribution to our work so we can carry on funding this. Just to give you some insight, this event probably has cost us somewhere between £600 to £700. And each event is such. We do at least 3 a year, and as you heard at the beginning, we have multiple chapters and we are growing. And we are only funded by the Karyakartas that volunteer their time and energy in terms of both Tan, Man and Dhan, but also well-wishers like yourselves who have willingly signed up for a monthly contribution with us. So if you can and you would like to, I encourage you to please go and speak to Drishti, who is just there, who will be waiting at the desk as you walk out. And Drishti don't let anybody out until they sign it. On that note, that's the well-wishers side of things. So you also know there is a website called vicharmanthan.org where you can keep up to date with future events, different chapters that are starting off, and all the list of speakers that we have had on this. Very soon and very shortly, we will start uploading videos of all of our previous Vichar Manthans and this one as well on our YouTube channel and on the website. It's work in progress. So thank you very much. I hope you will support us, and I'll pass you back on to Ravi.
I'd like to thank our speakers, Acharya Vidya Bhaskar and Dinaji. I'd like to thank Newark Museum, who've been brilliant as always with the tech and supporting us. And also Kiranji Raval at the back for videoing our event, which hopefully, as Sachin said, will go up on YouTube. Just finally, before you leave, there's some feedback forms. If you could fill that out, that would be great. And feel free to stay, hang around and mingle with us. Okay, thank you very much.